starting to remind me of Dragnet.
Dragnet?
Is it Dragnet?
The old cop show?
Mm-hmm.
I never watched it.
Like the intro?
Oh, yeah.
You know? I can't remember how it went, but
they
it was
start
something
talking about
along
the case
those lines.
files or something like that.
Los Angeles, California.
Yeah, I never watched it.
I never did either.
Just the
The movie, though.
Yeah.
Speaking of Courage podcast, the movie. You've seen the movie.
Dragnet? No.
Dude, it's hilarious.
I've seen Naked Gun.
With the pagans?
Does that count?
We are back in your life. What's going on, man?
Oh, nothing, man. Just sweating.
You just got back from 115 degrees
swap meet, walking around.
Yeah, and you got one pen?
Yeah, that's usually how it is. Have you ever seen you haven't seen Band of Brothers, right?
Oh, of course not.
Yeah, at the end.
No, I've seen like episodes of it.
Have you seen the interviews at the end?
A few here and there.
There's one guy when he's talking about Bastogne, and he says to this day, you know, when he's as an elderly man, whenever he's in bed at night and it's freezing, he looks at his wife and he says, "I thank God I'm not in Bastogne."
Really?
That's how I feel like when it's hot and miserable outside. I'm so glad I'm not in Iraq right now, because it's like, even though I'm hot and miserable,
I'm not in
I got
Iraq.
short sleeves. Yeah,
Yeah, at least I'm in America.
Long sleeve shirt with a helmet and boots and knee pads and elbow pads and everything else. So.
How much does weather play into everything when you're out there?
It's awful.
Is it just...
Yeah. Especially if you're fighting someone else's territory, like we generally are.
Yeah.
They're acclimated to it, and we're not.
What do they do? Do they have AC units and all that crap out there?
In Iraq?
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on time and place, but, you know, and the guys in the initial invasion and stuff, you're just sucking it up. But later on, there was, you know...
They get established.
Buildings and air-conditioned units and stuff.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Being in a strange place.
Yeah.
Someone else's backyard.
Yep.
It's like when you go on vacation, you just feel uneasy.
Yeah.
I went to Mexico one time, and we got mugged on the street. And when you're in that emergency frame of mind, and you don't know, everybody looks like a villain.
Mm-hmm. We went to Jamaica. Everyone's like, everything could potentially be a threat, and you don't know what's acceptable and what's not.
Right? Yeah, you're like,
that's the worst part.
Can I beat the guy? Can I try to fight the guy, or am I going to end up in a friggin' Mexican prison? You know? So you're kind of like looking for help, and everybody looks like they're in on it.
Yeah.
Oh, it was awful.
Yep.
But the locals. This is way off topic, but anyway, we were walking down the street with my buddy's mom. She got her purse snatched. The local Mexicans in Rosarito chased him down and beat his head in with a rock.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was pretty cool. Where are we headed today?
Well, since it's so hot, we're going back to Korea again to be nice and cold. This is becoming a trend, I think. We'll just keep doing cold episodes during the summertime.
Sounds good.
It's hot here. Yeah, this was actually a request on one of the comments. Wade Rowcliffe, I hope I'm saying that right, requested Ronald Rosser. So.
I remember that comment.
Yeah.
Ronald Rosser.
Rosser's one of my favorites as well. So I'm more than happy to accommodate that one. Yeah.
What branch?
Army.
Yeah,
I said he was one of my favorites. What do you want, man? So as you can see by the uniform there, we're going into those Korean winters where it was, you know, negative degrees, below zero, wearing these big wool coats trying to keep warm. But that's, you know, you're kind of fighting against the elements there just as much as you're fighting the enemy.
Cool looking jacket.
It is a cool looking jacket. You could see some hipsters or some mods wearing that kind of stuff. Oh, for sure. But
those are selling out in Portland.
Yeah. But wearing those grenades and everything too, it's essential to keep you alive, because you can die from that cold just the same as you can die from an enemy bullet or anything like that.
Man.
Yeah, so...
freezing cold,
massive enemy, you know, the unknown, that seesaw battle, units getting cut off, units getting surrounded, just chaotic, hectic hellscape of a war. Vietnam, again, over 10 years long, we lost 58,000 people. Korea was about 3.5 years long. We lost almost 40,000 people in that same amount of time, 35 to 38,000 people, you know.
So way worse in terms of that, right?
Intensity during certain time periods, it was, I don't want to see any wars better or worse than others, but the intensity of combat was very extreme.
And it's the forgotten one.
And it's the forgotten war, Guys came home to you know, nothing, basically. No glory, no parades, no victory, because it was a stagnant war for decades.
So where was Rosser born?
All right, so Rosser was born in Columbus, Ohio on October 24th, 1929. So we talk a lot about, you know, guys are growing up during the Depression. This is the Depression. This is Black Thursday. The day he was born was Black Thursday with the stock market collapse and everything. And one of the worst days of the stock market, actually, when everybody was pulling everything out. And to add to that, he was the oldest son of 17 children.
Jesus.
So there was a total of 17 kids. He had one older sister, and then he was the rest. So his dad was a coal miner and he grew up during these miserable times, right? A coal mining family in Columbus, Ohio, with 17 kids. So you can imagine the hard scrabble life that is.
How do you even attempt to feed that many?
Yeah, and apparently that...
We make a pretty decent living, dude. I couldn't imagine having to pay for 17.
Can you imagine clothing for 17 kids?
That's what I'm saying.
Just anything. Any little production you do is going to be massive.
Imagine having 17 kids and trying to go to the movies.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think
Not that was an option then,
movies, but yeah, just sitting around the dinner table, you'd almost have to feed people in shifts, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a farm because they're, his dad's a coal miner. He's a superintendent of a coal mine, but his mom's a homemaker, right? So with these big families, though, just by the nature of it, the older kids are helping raising the younger kids. There's no way a mother is going to be able to do all of this. So he grows up looking out for his brothers and sisters. And as the oldest, he said he never had any time for hobbies because he had to take care of his family. So he ended up learning that his hobby was to be a fighter. He liked to get in fist fights and go around on the street. So that was if you asked him what his hobby was, it wasn't baseball or basketball or football, it was fighting. It was getting in fist fights. And he always said, if you bothered one of my brothers, I cleaned your clock. And if you bothered one of my sisters, you better leave town. So he grew up just being a tough kid.
He was the bully of the neighborhood?
I don't know that he was the bully. I think he was just walking around with his chest out, you know, that kind of like Audie Murphy, that pride that comes from nowhere,
Say something.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like what are you're wearing rags and you're poor, but it's just...
daring somebody to make fun of you.
Exactly. When he was in high school, he actually dropped out to work in a pottery factory to help support his family because, even though Dad had a decent job for the time, it's not going to be supporting everybody.
What would the motivation be to keep having kids at that, 17?
I don't know that it's
How do you not
intentional desire to have it.
17, though.
Yeah,
Jesus.
Birth control was different back then. Ideas of the family were different back then.
And then, like somebody said in the comments, were there families that were having kids for the help?
Yeah, absolutely. If you lived on a farm and stuff like that, your kids are gonna be laborers as they get older, and then not all the kids are gonna be surviving to adulthood in some situations, and then again, lack of birth control, religious reasons for some people not using birth control.
That poor woman. 17.
Imagine the physical fortitude of a woman to have 17 children.
She had to be
and
tough.
Still, it's not like you're done after that. You're still raising those 17 children. Good Lord,
That's
think about that kinds of stuff. So when you can imagine 17 kids, the age gap in between these kids.
Yeah.
So when there was 15 kids, his mother became pregnant, and then when she went to deliver, she ended up having twins. So that became 16 and 17.
Little exclamation point.
So Ronald was quoted as saying, "Well, there goes my place at the table," he told his brother. So he went ahead and joined the Army because he figured he was ready for one more. But when there was two, he was like, "Well, okay, it's time for me to go. I'm the oldest son, so I'm going to get out." Also, the Army was a good career choice. The war's over. This is 1946. World War II's gone. There's no more combat or anything, but it's going to help him put money on his family's table, and it's a good path for his future. So in 1946, he joins the Army, and he joins up for a 3-year term of service. He's 17 years old. His mom's going to go ahead and sign those papers, right? So he's going to go to Fort McClellan, Alabama, and being as tough as he is, he automatically volunteers to become a paratrooper. So he joins the 82nd Airborne, and he lives that post-war occupation, or not occupation, but that post-war military life, right? Where you have this weird dynamic of, you have fresh-faced guys like him that have spent their adolescence watching the war, and then you have guys that are still in the Army that are those heroes that have been fighting, that are still in, and then you have guys that are just desperately want to get out because they don't give a shit. So he's kind of in that fluid, but he does his 3 years in the Army, and then he gets out. He gets out of the Army, and he goes and he becomes a coal miner like his dad. And that's the end of our story. I'm just kidding. Obviously, that's not where our stories ends. So he was in from 1946 to 1949-ish about the Korean War starts in 1950. It's about 1950 to 1953. By nature of having so many brothers, of course, they're going to fall in that timeline, right?
Yeah.
So his younger brother, Richard, joins the Army, and he's in the initial push in the Korean War. So he's going to be there. So Ronald just got out. He's, I did my service, my time's over. And then his brother is wounded in the early days of the war. He's fighting with the 24th Infantry Division in this, as they're getting steamrolled, as that big surprise element, right? So Ronald's at home hearing about his brother, and his brother's wounded badly. So as someone who's protected his brothers his whole life, he's thinking like, oh, man,
I need to get in the
fight. But he's moving on with his life. His brother recovers in Japan, and then he's sent back to combat with the 1st Cavalry Division. And as we've talked about, the 1st Cavalry Division in the Korean War sees intense combat. So Ronald's at home and the family gets that letter that his brother ends up being killed. He's killed in combat in Korea. So, of course, that's going to profoundly affect Ronald. It's going to profoundly affect the whole family. Even though there's 17 of them, they're very tight-knit, right?
You would have to be.
Yeah, they almost don't even have any outside, friends or anything because their family is so organic and so tight. So when one of their brothers dies, it shakes everybody up. So Ronald decided, he said... he made up his mind, you can't kill my brother and get away with it. So he decided he's going to re-enlist in the army, and he's going to go back to Korea, or he's going to go to Korea, and he's going to get revenge for his brother. He's going to take his brother's place because they killed his brother, and he took that as a personal affront. Obviously, he knows he's not going to find the same unit or the same guys or anything, but you can't kill a Rosser and get away with it.
Yeah.
So Ronald's going to go ahead and join the army, and he's going to do what he can. So he re-enlists from Crookville, Ohio in 1951, and they initially sent him to Japan. Those occupation troops, because he's got experience, and he can help train other guys. But he's not having that because he joined the army to fight. So he requests combat duty, and they end up granting him his wish, and he gets sent to Korea. So in the end of July 1951, he was sent to the 2nd Infantry Division. They took a boat from Japan over to Korea, and I think with most people, you might be thinking, oh, crap, what did I get myself into? But this is exactly what Ronald wants, right? He's doing everything he can to get into combat. So they send him to the 2nd Infantry Division, and he gets assigned to a heavy mortar company with the 38th Infantry Regiment of the 2nd Infantry Division, which is one of the vanguard units of the Korean War. If anybody that was in the Army, you'll know that big Indian head patch. They're still in Korea to this day, so they're kind of famous for that.
So he wants to jump in the fight ASAP.
He wants to jump in the fight, and he wants to get there as quick as he can because he wants revenge. But keep in mind, he's got experience. Even though he doesn't have combat experience, he was already in the Army for 3 years. He was a paratrooper, so he's with a lot of these young guys who are draftees, right?
Yeah.
So even though he's there for revenge, he starts kind of realizing that he needs to protect these other guys as well.
He's the oldest of 17,
He's the oldest
He's
of 17.
He's going to have that naturally.
Exactly. So he has that same sense of brotherhood with these other guys. So his idea of revenge kind of turns into a sense of responsibility for these less hardened men in the company, and he starts looking out for them. Korea's vicious. Again, the heat weather, the extremes from the heat and the muddy and the dry months to the cold and the winter. So these guys are going to be suffering, and he's going to be trying to kind of keep them together as he's rising through the ranks. He first sees combat in an area called the Punch Bowl, and then he fights at Bloody Ridge in a 6-week battle. In August of 1951, he's wounded in the foot by a grenade shrapnel. In his foot, he gets hit while he's on the line. He's a forward observer, but he gets his wound treated, but that's going to be one of those lingering things because you're constantly marching, right? As an infantryman, you're going up and down these mountains. You're going through these things. You're wearing boots. Your feet are sweating.
Doesn't have time to heal.
Things are going to get torn up. So he's constantly dealing with that pain. And if you've ever dealt with a foot injury, again, it's going to keep reopening and keep being miserable. Yeah. In 1951, he fights in the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge. That's kind of a famous battle if you've heard of it, like the Clint Eastwood movie, Heartbreak Ridge. He's a forward observer, so again, we've talked about this before. He's going to be up by himself or forward of the lines with binoculars and a radio. He's calling in fire. So by doing so, he's calling in artillery fire. He's calling in mortar fire. He's killing hundreds of the enemy. So he's getting his revenge, right? This isn't a guy with a rifle who's, if you have one in your sights, you may kill somebody. You may never see the enemy. He's seeing these waves coming, and by his call for fire, he's directing this fire in. So he's
getting blood.
He's doing exactly what he wants. He killed, untold amount of people by mortar and artillery fire. And again, he's wounded by grenade shrapnel in the upper leg. He dug the wound out himself. He dug the grenade shrapnel out himself and poured the sulfa and just wrapped it up so he could keep going. He took care of his own wounds. While he's in Korea, he's seeing intense combat. He later said that he believed he killed 12 men in hand-to-hand combat during this time. He said, I've actually beat 7 people to death with my rifle, 2 North Koreans and 5 Chinese fighting hand-to-hand combat. I've bayoneted a couple in my time. And then he said, my job was to protect the lives of other people. I've killed thousands of people doing that. Now, he might be, overestimating a little bit there, but by nature of his job, by nature of being on the front lines and calling in those artillery in these massive waves.
Doesn't seem that crazy if you're calling in artillery.
Right. He's also, though, he's out in front, so he's kind of an individual. Whereas most guys are up with their units. They're going to be going forward, and they're going to be, you're on the line, and then you're getting rotated back. He's going to be attached to whatever unit's up in front. So he's going to be seeing quite a bit more combat than these other guys, and he's also used to being by himself. He's going to be used to.
And he's seen a lot of the bloodshed and the trauma and all that.
Oh yeah,
stuff.
absolutely. And we've talked about this. The enemy would fight in waves. They would come out. You'd hear the horns. You'd hear the bugles. You'd hear the whistles, and then they would just attack. They'd attack with rifles. The next wave would have grenades. The next waves would have nothing.
And they were like kamikaze style, right? Just
pretty
running.
much, yeah. Just massive bodies. The North Koreans and the Chinese. You know, and we're doing everything we can. There's interviews with veterans that would say the ground would shake when the enemy was coming because there was so many of them. Just these massive hordes. This psychological thing, and he's out isolated alone, maybe with another guy or two, just calling in the fire, just staying calm. If he breaks, everyone behind him is going to pay for it. But if he maintains his calm and his cool and he can stay up there, he can have a tremendous effect on this battle.
Yeah.
Right? You take your average infantryman out of the battle, and the course of the battle is not necessarily going to change. But this forward observer who's doing his job properly, huge, right? And it's going to be keeping these guys alive. So that becomes his goal, and that becomes his mission. He couldn't save his brother because he was at home, but he can save as many people as he can by doing his job. So he becomes an expert at it. And like he said on that, not many men get into the kind of combat I was in. Most men, their company goes up and their company comes back. I never came back. I always stayed up there, and I watched a lot of men come and go. He was actually attached to Turkish troops and Greek troops because Korea was a coalition. The UN, this was our first big action. So he's being attached to all kinds of people. And like I said, they'd rotate off the line and he'd stay up there. He ended up fighting in an area called the Iron Triangle, which is where he ended up earning his Medal of Honor. The Korean War was in phases. You know, they pushed south, we pushed north, we got close to the Yalu, and then we came to this almost like a stalemate where everybody was jockeying for position. This is kind of where he's going to be in the area, starting in November of 1951. Allied forces were trying to get the best defensible terrain near their lines, while we were having peace negotiations. We were trying to get the best position, not wanting to risk too much and push too much forward, but not wanting to fall back. It was almost in posturing. But during this time, it was called active defense. There was a lot of big flare-ups, right? So overall combat diminished, but there was a lot of pushes. You'd be stagnant on the front, and then the enemy would try to make a big push, or we would try to make a big push to gain land. So
because peace talks are happening,
right?
So wherever they make the deal is where the line's going to be.
So you're forcing back and forth, which is horrible mentally. Because you know,
what are we doing?
What do I give a shit about 5 more yards if I'm dead? You know, if my family never gets to see me again. But there were these huge flare-ups. In December of 1951, in the Kumwa Valley, the day before Christmas, Rosser and 73 men went out on a deep penetration. They're going up into, basically behind enemy lines, recon, doing everything, trying to get information and trying to devastate the enemy. He said they shot their way up almost into Pyongyang, and then they were overrun. Out of the 73 of them, only 6 of them ended up getting back alive, including Rosser. They had to jump into a river and swim down the river in this freezing cold while the enemy's shooting at them and lobbing grenades and things. And they're trying to, again, survive the cold, survive having your clothes weigh you down, trying to get under the water so the bullets aren't hitting you. There's about 20 of them that got into the river, and then only 6 of them made it back, according to his later statements, that were unharmed, and he was one of them. 2.5 weeks later, on January 12th, 1952, Rosser was attached to Company L of the 38th Infantrymen in this area called the Iron Triangle. So their mission is they're going to raid a Chinese-held mountaintop outpost position and destroy its winter installations. So we're always looking to kill the enemy, but they're intentionally trying to destroy their winter installations so these guys will freeze and be stuck out there.
What's a winter installation?
It's their fortifications, basically, so where they can stay warm and where they can have their, they want to, knock them off the position because you always want to destroy the enemy, you want to destroy the high point, you want to destroy their fortifications, but they also want to put them out in the cold and make them retreat, right? If they don't have this
They're
base,
not comfortable.
Yeah, because it's 20 degrees below zero at this point.
Jesus.
And there's a foot of crusty snow on the ground up in these high elevations.
20 below?
That's as cold as it could potentially get there, right? Snow on the ground, ice, every time you step, that ice is crunching, you're slipping,
Everybody's miserable.
Everybody's miserable.
Both sides, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But at least the enemy's in a fixed position, right? You're walking towards it. So every time you're walking, I don't care how cold it is outside, your body's going to start to sweat because you're wearing all this stuff, right? So as soon as you go stagnant, you're going to start freezing. All that your undergarments that are wet now with sweat are going to start to freeze, and you're going to just be miserable, and your feet are aching, and people have wounds. He has these grenade shrapnel wounds that he dug the shrapnel out himself, and they didn't heal properly.
Poor circulation,
so it's just going to be aching. Yeah. Oh yeah, and who knows if your boots fit properly? You probably have bad socks. You're filthy. You haven't been cleaned. You get chafing. That's one of the things we don't always talk about on here.
That'll make your day miserable.
Exactly. Just your thighs rubbing together.
Yeah.
If you go to the swap meet for a day, that might be uncomfortable. But if you're in the field for months, that can be life threatening.
Yeah.
It's ripping the skin off of you. You can get infections. You can, it hurts to walk when
Absolutely.
you sleep and it starts to heal, or your clothes stick to it and you wake up and it rips away. It's just miserable and it's constant. It's detrimental to your mental health. So by then, Rosser is a corporal, and he's a forward observer again, and this lead platoon during the assault. They plan on hitting them in the daylight. They're going to send one unit straight forward, and one unit's going to flank and try to go around this mountaintop position. They want to capture as many as they can, blow up their winter installations, and put them out in the cold. Plans never go according to plan, though, right? Or missions never go according to plan. So, of course, the Chinese are dug in. So by the time they start their daytime attack, the Chinese just open up on them with machine guns, with artillery, with mortars, with rockets.
From
with
that
everything.
fixed position.
From those fixed positions, because they know they're coming. They're not stupid.
Yeah.
When you're on a... When I was in NTC, when we were out in California and Vegas and stuff, we'd be up on the mountain waiting for the enemy, the training. You could see them for hours and hours and hours, and you just kind of look, and then you take a nap. Hey, wake me up when they get closer, right?
Yeah.
They know you're coming. They can see you coming. It doesn't
And they're
matter
going
how
to
stealthy
protect
you
those
try to
winter
do.
installations with their life, man.
And they don't want to die,
Think
right?
about that, though. Like, if they're coming for that stuff that's going to keep you warm through this miserable cold.
And we have this kind of stuff that the Chinese were wearing quilted padding basically to keep them warm, and the North Koreans were even less well off. So they're miserable too. Some of them are going to be wearing captured American gear or enemy gear. They're just as miserable. We often think about our side, but think about them too. A Chinese soldier that's in North Korea has moved a long way to get there. This isn't, they didn't just get flown there in the lap of luxury. They're miserable too. And they have a lot of times inferior weapons. They have these burp guns and they're not as well trained on some of this stuff. So they're going to be just as terrified.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that they're showing courage by attacking in these waves, it doesn't mean they want to die by any means. They very much want to be alive.
It's really an interesting part about war, how both sides can be in the same mental condition as far as like fear.
People are people, man.
Yeah.
That's one thing I think we tend to forget when we look at the enemy.
We think that they're like this
Exactly.
brooding force that's...
Well, that's part of what we do. Even with the propaganda and stuff. Oh, the enemy is the Hun. Stop the Hun. Or they're coming. Most of them are, you'd be friends on the other side. In other circumstances, you might be...
Think about the ones that had the fixed machine gun positions when people were running on, when we were coming on the beach.
Right, yeah.
And that's a terrible battle for us. We're losing a lot of people,
Right.
but imagine them going, oh shit, they just keep coming.
The German soldiers at Normandy,
That's
up on
what-
their hilltop
Think about how
positions.
terrifying that must have been
Exactly.
as they just keep coming.
And looking out at the ocean, we're talking about Normandy now, and just seeing that massive armada. You're not surviving that, but you can't just quit and run away either. You gotta
so
wait
both
for
sides,
it.
man, have that fear.
A Chinese soldier or a North Korean soldier on a hilltop in North Korea, it's the same as an American soldier on a hilltop in North Korea waiting for the other side to come. And I think that's important, and that's why
do too, man.
I value so much the stories of soldiers, because it's the human condition, right? But in December of 1951, that doesn't matter if you're Ron Rosser or if you're any of these guys. The only thing that matters is the enemy's in front of you, and you gotta destroy them, or they're gonna destroy you.
Absolutely.
So, as they start this attack, they end up getting overwhelmed. There's hundreds of enemy troops swarming in the area, so Rosser's in his position, and he starts calling in artillery fire, and he starts calling in his mortar fire. He's doing everything he can to keep these other guys alive, because he's not in this direct line of fire. These guys are, so he's doing his job, and he's calling them in. He later said, I made up my mind I wasn't going to run and I wasn't going to surrender. And he also thought back to his training, because he was in the 82nd Airborne. And the 82nd Airborne's motto was, the fight's not good until you're surrounded, because they're used to parachuting in and having the enemy all around them, right? So where some of these guys might be panicking, Rosser's going, all right, here we go, good. This is what I want. I want to kill them. So the Americans are taking heavy casualties. Keep in mind also, if you get shot in this cold and you go down and your guys can't get you, people are freezing to death. These wounded guys, they're going to be laying there choking on their blood, and their blood's going to be freezing, and they're on these snowpack conditions, and you can't find them and you can't get to them. Out of the 170 who began the initial battle, there was only about 35 left at this point. Rosser falls back to the company position, and the captain who was in charge of this attack, the U.S. Army captain, had been wounded in the face. His face was caked with blood. The blood was freezing to his face, and he just looked miserable. So he grabs Rosser's radio, and they're expecting, their attack has completely failed at this point. 35 out of 170 are still combat efficient, or still combat effective.
Jeez.
So the captain grabs the radio, and he calls back to headquarters expecting them to say, fall back. And he gets over the radio, and the radio squawks, make another attack. Organize your guys and make another attack. And Rosser looks at the captain, and he looks around, and he just sees guys that are miserable, guys that are dying, guys that are scared, guys that are terrified. All they want to do is retreat. And the captain's got kind of this forlorn look on his face. So Rosser looks at him and he says, "I'll take your guys up, Captain." And the captain looks back at him like he's crazy, and he says, "How are you going to do that?" And he says, "I'm going straight ahead shooting, Captain. I'll take your men with me and we'll go straight in shooting. If we make the trench, we've got a chance." And the captain told him, "You're not going to make it." And Rosser said, "Well, I'm going to try." So basically, looking around again, seeing all these devastated faces, and he later said in one interview, he saw the captain, he heard the radio, and he heard someone say, "I'll take him," and then he realized it was him that was talking. He didn't even, consciously necessarily think of that. But he's a leader. He's been in combat. He's experienced. He knows what they have to do. He knows there's no way off the hill but through the enemy, so he's going to try. So he lines up the men, and he starts telling them. And again, these guys are combat veterans, too. They've just been through this hellacious battle. But he's got more experience than him. And like you said, he's the oldest of 17, the oldest brother of 17
He's made a lot of sacrifices in his life.
And his whole life is preparing for this, right?
Think about how many sacrifices he's had to make.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just...
From the time he's a kid, dude.
You don't get new anything.
No.
And because of that, he's looking at these other people. He's probably not... Some of these guys outrank him. Some of these guys are older than him. But he's looking at them as people that need his help.
Yep.
So he lines them up and he tells them, "We're going to attack this hill. We're going to attack this enemy position." And he says, "You won't have no trouble knowing where I'm at, boys. I'll be right in front of you." Basically, don't be scared. Just follow me, right?
Yeah.
And that's a powerful thing for this. So he gets them lined up and he says, "All right, let's go." And they jump up out of their, covered and concealed position and they just start trudging towards the enemy. Now, keep in mind, you're not at a sprint because you're going uphill. And it's below zero and you're miserable and you're wearing these gears. So you're moving as fast as you can, but you're not moving that fast. So they're moving directly forward and they're using their fire as cover. So Rosser's firing his weapon, everybody's firing, everybody's shooting, and that's how they're trying to advance through this area, trying to keep the enemy's head down. Keep in mind, this is 35 guys charging hundreds of guys in a fixed fortification.
Damn, shooting down at you.
To attack a defensive position, you want to have 3-to-1 odds. You want to have 3 times as many as they do to attack a defensive position. We are about the opposite of that. We're 1-to-3 odds, attacking uphill at a fortified position that's already slaughtered you, that's already had their defenses fixed on you. But Rosser leads his men. He starts charging forward. Many soldiers, as they're moving forward, start getting shot behind him. And he's up in front, so he doesn't really realize it necessarily. But guys that are going with him, some of them are getting killed, some of them are getting wounded, some of them are falling down from exhaustion, and some of them never went in the first place, right?
Just stayed back.
So by the time he gets to the hill, he looks around and he realizes he's by himself. Nobody else made it up to the top of the hill with him. And all he's got is his carbine and his grenades. But he reaches this bunker and he tells himself, "Well, Ronald, you've done a lot of trouble getting yourself here in the first place." And he says, "The enemy's right there. They killed your brother, and it's time to get going." He says, I did everything I could. So he says he let out a war whoop like an Apache Indian, and he jumped in the trench, and immediately he just started firing and just started killing of them. He was so close that he stuck the carbine in one of their ears and pulled the trigger, and then one of the enemy that was behind him was trying to shoot him, so he swung around and shot the enemy soldier in the neck. The soldier didn't die. He fell down and he grabbed onto Rosser's leg. So Rosser kicked him off and shot him through the chest and killed him.
Damn.
So Rosser's now in this opening part of the trench by himself with 9 guys. He turns around, and then the next Chinese are coming at him. The next Chinese are soldiers. Soldiers are charging him because he's the only enemy there. This is like jumping into an ant pile. If you've ever seen those videos of like a cricket in an ant pile and they're all over him. So these guys are all swarming to his position.
And they can't fire at him, right?
Right. Well, they're trying, but he's firing back. And he actually has a good weapon for it because he's got this carbine. So he shoots the next Chinese, and then the next, and then the next. And he says one of them tried to shoot him with his burp gun because they all had burp guns. And I hit him in the head with my rifle. So he's swinging and he's clubbing. These guys are trying to tackle him. They're trying to shoot him. They're trying to get their rounds off, but he's shooting everyone he sees. And you got to imagine the element of surprise and the chaos, too. They didn't expect someone to actually be in their position, but he's right on top of them. He said, it was just a lot of something to hit. He said, I struck him with my rifle, the butt of my rifle. He stuck one of them so hard in the head that it cracked the guy's skull open. He said, I didn't think you could do that, but you can. And then I knocked him and he went down. I hit the next one with my rifle. And then a couple more of them tried to make a run for it, and I shot him. So he jumps in this position with these 9 guys and just immediately starts shooting them and overwhelming them. And as they start coming forward, every person he sees, he's turning with his carbine and he's shooting them. And this is just this frenzied attack. So because of his actions, the other ones start to retreat. So he starts shooting them in the back as they run away.
Yeah.
He said the best way to describe it was he was in amongst them, basically, right? He's, like we've talked about in other battles, we can't call in artillery fire, we can't call in mortar fire, we can't call grenades because they're on top of you. So he's in there, and he just starts chasing them. He says he chases them to the end of the bunker, and then they ran into the fixed fortification portion of the bunker. So he got up on top of it, and he pulled out his white phosphorus grenades, and he chucked the white phosphorus grenades. We've talked about that on the show, how devastating they are. So he pulls the pins, and he kicks them in. As he does so, these guys immediately start running out, and they're on fire. He said their eyes were on fire, and they're just burning. So out of mercy, he ended up shooting them and killing them. And he said the ones that didn't run out, he let them just burn to death because they didn't choose to come out, and he wasn't going to risk it himself. But he made it on top. So then he stood on top of that trench, and he's yelling for the Americans, come on, bring it on up. But everybody's either wounded, scared, or dead, so they're not coming. So he just decides to keep his one-man assault going as far as he can. He starts moving down the trench line, firing at everything he sees. Again, not only are these guys that killed his brother, but these are guys that are trying to kill his new brother. So he's doing everything he
who are
can to
actively
devastate
killing
these
his
attacks. Exactly. So he says they'd get knocked down every time they would try to come support him, the Americans. He said it was a really nasty, close-in fight. And he thought, well, I'll just try to hold this position as long as I can. So he ran around the corner, and then 35 more enemy soldiers were rushing at him. So he thought to himself, here I go again, and he jumped and charged right at him. He just left his position, charged, and went forward. He later said, close combat never bothered me like it did a lot of people. It always seemed like they were a lot slower than me. It looked like they were in slow motion, and I was always on top of them real fast. And I'd close with them, take them in large groups at a time. So it's almost like Muhammad Ali or Anderson Silva, those type of fighters, right? Yeah.
Matrix.
He's jumped into the trench. He's killed 9 soldiers.
And they're coming.
Right. He's on top of this position. He just threw white phosphorus grenades in. He's killing the enemy as they come out. 35 guys are attacking him. Rather than running, he charges them, right? Think about that as the enemy. If you let's go get this guy, and you don't know how many people are behind him either, and then he jumps down and he charges at you. So he fights them until he runs out of ammo. Unfortunately, by now, these guys are retreating because they don't know what's going on. They don't know how many guys they're fighting. They don't know anything, so they're falling back. But right now, he's out of ammo. So he decides, there's more enemy up here to kill, so I need to go back and get more ammo, basically. Even though he's by himself, he decides to go down the hill and start stripping his wounded and dead soldiers' ammunition so he can go back and get in the fight. As he starts going down, though, he starts seeing wounded soldiers. So he sees a wounded lieutenant who's laying in the ground. This wounded lieutenant shot. So Rosser picks him up and starts carrying him back, right? As he does so, the Chinese kind of repositions themselves and start firing down on him. They're throwing grenades. They're shooting at him. They're trying to fire machine guns at him while he's carrying this lieutenant, but he's able to make it. He gets back to a reasonably safe position, and he starts taking all the ammunition off the guys. When he does, there's an artillery soldier who's covering him with the rifle, and he tells him, like, what are you doing? And he says, I'm trying to kill as many of them as I can. So the soldier actually stopped in the middle of the battle and said, I want to shake your hand. So he did. So they shook hands, and then this artillery soldier kept giving him cover fire while Rosser made a second attempt. He climbed the hill again, and he rushed right back to the same position he was in because he kind of knows the trench line now.
Yeah.
When he gets to the top, he threw a grenade inside as quickly as he can. The enemy go down from the grenade, and as soon as they're recovering, the ones that survived, he jumps in and he's on top of them. He starts shooting them with his carbine. He starts shooting them with everything he can. He's hitting them with the buttstock of his rifle. He's swinging his rifle. He's stabbing him with his bayonet. On the way up to the enemy bunkers, he got hit by a grenade, but he kept going. He just didn't stop, right? So now he's got fresh shrapnel in his legs. He's got, he's bleeding. He's hurt. He's got those old injuries. When he gets into the trench, they throw another grenade, and he's able to deflect it. He said the grenade hit him in the hip and dropped against his foot. I couldn't get it away from me, so I drove across the Chinaman I just killed. Just as I went over this Chinese soldier, the grenade went off. Instead of blowing my legs off, it blew the heel off of one of my boots. When I hit the ground, I bounced back up and caught this guy up on his toes, looking to see if he got me. I gave him about 6 shots in the belly. So as he's coming into the trench, a soldier, he kills one soldier, enemy soldier, a grenade hits him, he knocks it down, and it actually blew his boot off. And the soldier that threw the grenade in came in to check, so Rosser shoots him in the belly 6 times and kills him, right? Now, he climbs out of the trench, and he's moving over open ground. So now he's not following this trench line anymore. He's in the open ground, and as the reinforcements are coming, he's firing at every Chinese soldier he can. Just like he did before, though, he's going to run out of ammo because you can only carry so much on you on all this equipment. So he's firing until he's out of ammo, and then he decides to go back down the hill and get some more ammo because he's not done yet, right?
Yeah.
So he goes back down the hill, and just like he did before, he sees another wounded soldier laying there, right? Another wounded soldier who's contemplating whether or not he's going to survive, who's trying to take assessment of his wounds, and then Rosser comes by, so Rosser picks him up, and he carries him down too. The enemy's trying to reposition themselves, so they're not putting as much fire on him, so Rosser's able to save this guy. Resupplies himself with ammo, and he heads back up for a third charge.
Jesus.
So after his third charge, alone, for his one-man battle, he's been fighting for over an hour at this time. He said, I was on top of this mountain by myself, taking on sometimes as many as 200 Chinese. They were all over me, jumping on my back, grabbing me by my leg, trying to tackle me down, and I was beating them down with my rifle. So he's just fighting with everything he has. But keep in mind, too, I mean, it sounds crazy. How can one guy fight 200 people? But this is, if you ever seen the 300 Spartans or Thermopylae, it's because they're in this narrow area, right? You might have dozens of guys, but it's one-on-one when you're right there. And they're scrambling. They're trying to tackle him. He's staying up. He's hitting him down as he goes. He's stabbing him. He's shooting him.
Guys can.
Exactly. In the back, they might be shooting each other in the back as they're going. But he's pushing forward. He's got the initiative, and he's not afraid. So they're falling back. They don't know what's going on. When they turn their back to him, they're sit and duck. And war's not a place of mercy, so he's gunning them down from behind. He's throwing grenades at them. If they run to safety, I doubt that any of them were trying to surrender, but even if they were, there's no surrender on a mountaintop in the middle of the firefight. So he's shooting everything that moves. He later said, "It was too late to be scared. A dude was jumping on my back. No use being scared. Too late for that stuff. I was used to close hand-to-hand fighting. I wasn't worried about it. I mean, I wasn't happy about being there, but I wasn't worried about it because I've never seen anybody I couldn't take." So,
just a tough guy.
So from a whole life of fighting, he felt like there's nobody up here that can kill me, right?
Yeah.
And if they do, I won't know it anyway. So he just keeps into him. But eventually he realizes that there's too many of these enemy up here, and eventually they're gonna kill him, and they're gonna dislodge these guys. So he makes his way back down the hill, and he finds that captain that was wounded in the face, and he tells the captain, "We got to get out of here. Basically, there's no taking this hill. I did my best, but there's no taking this hill." So by now the captain's he's losing it a little bit. He's wounded. Everybody's wounded. So even though he's a corporal, Rosser organizes the platoon, and he organizes an organized withdrawal. Rather than just falling back, rather than running away and showing their back, Rosser starts giving everybody encouragement, and Rosser starts telling everybody what they need to do. Rosser starts taking these soldiers who are not wounded or are less wounded and assigning them. You carry him, right? So everybody has this sense of organization that they might survive. And then Rosser, who by the way is wounded himself, and he's got to be to the point of exhaustion by all this fighting. I don't care who you are. He starts moving through the open area and picking up these other wounded guys and dragging them back to a safe position. Eventually, he organizes the withdrawal of the decimated company. At the end of this fight, he calculated that he had killed more than 20 with grenades and 28 with rifle fire. He said, "I actually killed a lot of people that day. Plus, I took out about another 200 with mortar fire and tank fire. I killed a lot of people that day."
Damn.
Because he's calling in everything, right? And he says, of the 170 men that were with him that day, only 68 returned. 90 were killed, and 12 more were listed as missing his action. So just to show you the intensity of this combat. One man with courage makes a majority. That's my favorite quote, right? That I keep repeating on here, though. One man, he chose to push forward. Even though the company was decimated, think how much worse it would have been if they had tried to stay where they were, or if there was nobody there to lead them. And that's where Rosser was. And he later said, "I did it because I would have been ashamed not to." Rosser went to Korea for revenge. He wanted to get revenge, but when he got there, he found brotherhood, and he found these guys that needed him, and that's what he was doing, right? A lot of guys, I shouldn't say a lot of guys, some people kill, for vengeance. Some people kill out of fear. Rosser was killing out of sense of responsibility, and he was doing a hell of a good job at it. He was just a phenom in this sense, and he was able to do it. Somebody later asked him, "Have you ever thought about the fact that you killed so many people? Does it bother you?" And he said, "It doesn't bother me any." And they said, "No." And he said, "I think it bothered them some," referring to all the guys he killed. So he was just a badass, right?
Yeah.
The Korean War keeps going, though. So Rosser stayed on the front lines while his unit was called back. He ended up being attached to some other companies, calling in forward artillery, calling in the tank fire, calling in the mortars, calling in everything else. He got a call on the radio from the regimental commander one day, and they told him, "You've been recommended for the Medal of Honor. You need to come off the hill," right? And he said, "I'm not coming off the hill." And they said, "You need to come off the hill. You've been recommended for the Medal of Honor." And he said, "You people can put me in for whatever you want to, but I don't have to take it." So he stayed up on that hill because he didn't want to leave the position where he could protect other people. And that was in the middle of January, and he stayed in the front lines until the middle of May when his tour was over. And then he finally was sent back to the United States.
That is awesome.
So in May of 1952, he returned home. And the first thing he did is he went to his mother and he told her that he had avenged his little brother's death.
No, you think?
That one Rosser that the enemy killed was probably the worst thing they did because of the fury that they brought over. In June 27th of 1952, President Truman presented him with the Medal of Honor at the White House. Like a lot of these guys, the Medal of Honor changed his life, though, right? He said it was a very humbling experience. He was actually more afraid when he was getting the medal, from the president, being nervous and everything, than he was when he was actually in combat, just because that's not the kind of thing he was used to. But his life, his mindset kind of changed, though, He went for revenge, like I said, but he started to recognize humanity, and he just wanted to look out for other people. And he ended up staying in the Army He served for 22 years. He served in Germany. He served all over the place. He was a career soldier, and he was a mentor and a leader to a lot of these other guys. On September 20th, 1966, another one of Rosser's youngest brothers, because again of the timeline, ended up being killed in Vietnam. He was a Marine, and he was killed in the early fighting during the war. So Rosser immediately put in a reassignment request for Vietnam because he wanted to go get revenge for his other brother.
Gosh.
And the Army rejected his request because, he's older and he's a Medal of Honor recipient. So kind of because of that, he said, well, I guess it's time to hang it up then. There's no good for me here. So he finally retired from the Army. So can you imagine being the mother, though, having one son who's a Medal of Honor recipient, one son who's killed in action in Korea, and one son who's killed in action in Vietnam?
Wow.
What a family, right?
Yeah.
While he was in the Army, he earned the Combat Infantry Badge, the Glider Badge, Master Parachutist Badge, Pathfinder Badge, Rigger Badge, and Recruiter Badge. One of his most treasured duties was he was the body bearer for the remains of the unknown soldiers at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington Cemetery. So that, meant something to him because he was able to...
What did he do there?
He was one of the tomb, the body bearers that when they... The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier has a soldier from World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, I believe. So he was there when they formalized these ceremonies and everything like that. He ended up getting a bachelor's degree. He went to college. And then he started scholarships in the names of both of his brothers that were killed in action. So kind of to further that. Later on in life, he ended up going around and speaking to children about responsibility, about patriotism, about what it means to be a good citizen and a good brother. Because, again, brother doesn't just have to be blood. It's all the people that are around you. It's part of that community. And that's what it was. In 1999, he donated his medal to the state of Ohio because he wanted to inspire children to give back to their communities and kind of be what it was for. And he said, "A grateful nation gave me the medal, and I wanted to give it back to them." Despite the anger that he had and the vengeance that he wanted, later in life, he actually became a school teacher, and he taught about Asian culture. So in 2001, he actually went to China, and he visited with Chinese dignitaries. And somebody asked him later, do you hate the Chinese? Would you ever shake hands with them? And he said, I already have. He's gone over to China, and he sees them just like how we talked about. He saw them as soldiers, the forgiveness, right? Well, he sees what he was in him was in them. How many Chinese and Korean soldiers on the other side of the battlefield had lost a brother?
Brothers,
They might have been the same way. How many of them lost friends? So he said the Chinese treated him well, and he doesn't believe that the hate should continue. He believed that everybody should. Time's gone by. We should all move on, and we should heal together. Over time, his desire for revenge faded. Instead of thinking about the men he killed, he preferred to think about all the soldiers he saved. And Rosser died in 2020 at the age of 90 years old. He was survived by his daughter and his wife. Rosser's kind of the epitome of that soldier that's born to be, right? That guy that's, like I said, I think the best way to look at it is Anderson Silva or Muhammad Ali or those guys that are just so much quicker and so much better and so much,
peak, everything slows down for them.
Exactly. And that's where he was. And he had the courage to go with it too. So Rosser was the embodiment of the American fighting man in Korea. He was a forward observer. He was an infantryman. He was in combat. He shot men. He killed men with artillery, with bayonets and everything. And he was still able to come back and live his life and look past the war and kind of see his enemies as people, which is kind of important. Which is it's interesting that we talked about at the beginning because kind of that's where it is. And it's. People are driven by a number of things. In his sense, he was driven by revenge and almost hatred, but it was also that love and that deep despair that he had for his brother. One of the things he talked about was when he got to Washington, they were showing him all the packets of all the soldiers that were recommended for the Medal of Honor, and all of them had a cover letter basically on top and a file, and his was the only one that didn't have the cover on top. It actually had an artist rendering of him on a hill fighting the Koreans and the Chinese, and in the clouds above, they drew a picture of his brother as an angel watching him.
Wow.
And he said he started crying when he saw that, and he said as an old man, he would still think about that, and he would get shaken up.
Damn.
I have books of him. I have books of other Medal of Honor, or with all the pictures of the Medal of Honor recipients, and they get to choose where they take their photo, and it's kind of telling,
Yeah.
And it's a little war memorial, and it's got pictures of both of his dead brothers, and then he's standing there in front of it, just
That's
a little
awesome.
Desk-type memorial, and it kind of speaks to the kind of person he is, I think.
That's cool, man. Damn.
Yeah, so that's the Korean War, man. Just straight untold
Gutsy.
viciousness, and fighting for these hills. And what was the name of the battle he fought in? It's not Normandy. It's not the Battle of the Bulge. It's
some unnamed
Hill 157 or whatever it's going to be. And that's how Vietnam was.
And we didn't even get it.
Right. Yeah, we failed in that attempt, in that one, And that's kind of one of the tragedies of Korea or Vietnam. It's these guys that die on, you know, little plots of land that almost become meaningless, you know.
Yeah.
But they're given meaning by people like Rosser, and they're given meaning by the guys that were laying on the side of the hill that Rosser picked up and carried out, or the guys that had given up hope at the bottom of the hill when Rosser starts telling him, you grab your buddy, you grab this guy, and let's get out of here and stuff. Every one of those guys that survives and has children, that's, I think, where the meaning is in war.
Agreed.
Rather than the uselessness.
Yeah, that is a crazy story.
Yes.
God.
17 kids, man. Think about that
Uphill.
mom. Think about that mom.
Man, she created some warriors, huh?
Absolutely.
Dude.
Well, son of a coal miner, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe we give the dad some credit, too.
Yeah, that's true.
Wouldn't it be interesting if dad was like a weenie?
He's like a total puss.
We're just assuming, but we don't know.
His wife just punks him around.
I sincerely doubt it.
I
But
do
too. You never know. You know, we're just
It would be
speculating.
interesting to see like the dynamic of Medal of Honor parents. Like,
Right.
was the woman the one that ran the house, or was
Yeah.
it the dude, or was it a complete mixed bag?
I'm
Probably.
sure it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Because of some of these that we've found. You know,
But there is some common themes, like we said. It's always
Yeah.
a lot of times it's the older brother.
yeah, and
know what I mean?
you always pick up on that, and it is, you know, some of these guys like Jack Lucas's dad died at a young age, and he had to become the father. Other guys, but we've only gone through comparatively a handful of recipients as to how many there are, but they come from all walks of life. They come from all kinds.
But
of
that
things.
older brother thing is always stood out to me because it's the one person in the family that can't rely on anybody else.
Right.
They have to be self-reliant, and I think that really lends itself in battle. Like,
And that shows you how important life experience is too.
Absolutely.
You know, you might all be, you know, your first month in the Army, but you might be an 18-year-old kid. The guy next to you might have 3 kids. The guy
Yeah.
next to you might have, you know, he might be a professional instructor of some type and be used to this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. It's old hand to them. So yeah, when even though he was a corporal, which is relatively low ranking,
yeah.
he's been responsible for other people his whole life. You know.
Well, they say wisdom comes from suffering.
Yeah.
So, who suffered the more in a 17 person?
Right.
Maybe not suffering.
Right. But
as
they're
opposed
growing
to
up with the
everybody else.
hardships. They're overcoming things. They're
They're
learning
seeing
to be
it all. They're
independent.
shouldering a lot of the responsibility. They're not getting to go play sports or play with their friends.
Yeah.
They're having to stay home and watch their little ones. And
Yeah, and everything's a totality. Nobody is born on a hill in Korea with a
Yeah.
rifle in their hand. You know, it's all their life experience, and it's
Yeah.
all their things. It's their mothers, it's their fathers, it's their brothers, it's their community. It's Alan Lynch being bullied the whole time,
Yeah.
his whole life.
Yeah.
You know, it's all these other guys. You ever heard of Jim Bowie?
no.
He died in the Alamo as the knife fighter.
Oh,
Bowie
yeah,
knife
yeah,
or
yeah.
Bowie, Bowie or Bowie, depending on where you're from, is how you pronounce it. But one of the cool stories about him and his mother and the kind of person she was Jim Bowie he's a knife fighter, he's a frontiersman. He lived a wild life, but when he died in the Alamo, when they brought word to his mother and told him that Bowie was dead, she didn't cry, she didn't say anything. The only thing she said was, "I'll wager you didn't find any wounds in his back."
Yeah,
Meaning you
That's
don't
badass.
even need to tell me how he died, but I know that
I think
he
the Luttrell,
died as a man.
Marcus Luttrell's mom said something similar. Like,
Yeah.
if my son, I don't remember what it was, but it was something along those lines.
Yeah.
Like, if my son dies out there, good. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Or Sam Houston's mother was the same way. When he went off to war, she gave him a ring, and the only word that was in the inside was honor, and basically said, "Don't disgrace this." I don't remember her exact quote, but she said the door of my cabin is always open to heroes, but it's eternally closed to cowards. If you show your back, or if you're a coward, I'd rather you be buried in a mass grave than come home to me. So don't even do it. Yeah, don't disgrace our family name, and don't disgrace us. So yeah, people that grow up with things like that.
Yeah.
The Spartans, when mothers would give them their shield before they go off to war, they'd say either return with it or on it. Don't disgrace your nation.
Yeah.
Don't leave your shield behind. Don't. Your shield is to protect your brothers on your right and left. So if you lose your shield, you're disgracing, and you're disgracing your nation, disgracing your brothers. You're worthless. And if you die, you're carried on it. So either carry it back like a man, or be carried on it like because you're dead. Otherwise, there's the only two ways you're allowed
That's
to
so
come
badass.
home. Yeah.
Awesome story, man. Thanks, dude.
All right, so that's, again, some of these you got to run through a little bit fast, but that's the story of Ronald Rosser. He's a hell of a man. He died, again, not too terrible long ago, but that was a request. If anybody else has any other requests for individual people or particular wars, or if you want an
Family
Air
members.
Force, Marine, whatever that may be, let us know, and we'll do our best to get it up.
All right, we'll see you next
Cool.
week or two.
All
Later.
right, see ya.